Welcome, everybody, to the Living Your Career Show. My name is Roisin Duffy. I am a director of Blue Sky Careers. We are a recruitment and career advisory agency. The theme of our show today is, are ethical foundations more important or perhaps more important than strong values? And we have a very special guest, and her name is Carolyn Varley. Carolyn is a mother of two fabulous girls. She's a journalist, she's an educator, she's an executive with national and international experience. She's worked in Europe and Southeast Asia. She holds a master in business in journalism from QUT, and she specialized in ethics. She has co-produced a journalism textbook, which I imagine, Carolyn, was a labor of love. She is a former government and university communication leader. She is the current director of communication and engagement at the Queensland Mental Health Commission. Her passion is ethical leadership. And I can't tell you how pleased we are to have you today, Carolyn. Thanks for coming and spending some time with us.
Thanks for having me.
I guess the first thing, Carolyn, we've talked about this before, and I know, you hold, your values and your ethical approach uppermost in everything that you do. Why, I guess, are ethical foundations more important than strong values? Why do you think they are?
Well, I think anyone can have strong values. It doesn't mean that their values are in the least bit useful. I would say that we can look around some of the world leaders that we've got at the moment and look at their values. They hold their values very strongly. I think their values are totally unethical and immoral, but they do have very strong values. So, no, I would say that an ethical approach is more important than a values-based one, unless, of course, your values are based on strong ethics.
One of the things I know is very important to you is living an ethical life. And I know you to do that in every quarter of your life. What does ethical leadership mean to you, though?
Just before I answer that, I don't know that I do live an ethical life in every quarter. I do my best. But, I would be an absolute fraud to suggest that I don't slip up. Of course, I slip up all the time, both at work and in my personal life. I think that it's more important to try than to actually, it would be more important to succeed, but I think that's a big ask for anybody. And now I've completely lost what you asked me.
My question was ethical leadership. What does it mean to you? We've talked about some of the political leaders around the world at the moment. Perhaps they have their own set of values. We may not necessarily agree with them. But I guess it's the ethical standards that we're talking about today. What does it mean to you to be an ethical leader?
So to me, it really means treating everyone fairly. And I mean your staff, your managers, people at all levels of the organisation, the clients, customers, whatever it might be that you're dealing with, but the broader community as well, being aware that what most organisations do has some flow-on effect to people that you'll never see, that you might not even see as your stakeholders, and being fair to the community and to the planet, really. I think that's incredibly important for me because that's being fair to future generations. I guess a big key for me is giving people space to grow. I think that any member who's on your team should be growing and should have that capability to grow all the time. So it's nurturing people, helping them develop, and it's taking pride in what they do rather than taking credit for what they do. So for me, a measure of success of my role as a leader is the success and the achievements of the people that I'm working with, both now and in the past. When I was a journalism educator, I still come across people who I taught years and years ago who tell me that I had some positive and lasting effect on them. And that's an amazing reward to be able to hear that sort of thing. So, I think that's my idea of ethical leadership. It's leading from within the team rather than above it. It's working to bring everyone along.
I think one of the things that's important to you is how you were raised. I think at one point you said to me, Roisin, I've been raised with really good role models. And perhaps you can explain a little bit about how they have influenced you and who you are today as an ethical leader.
Oh, look, absolutely. I mean, one of my most powerful role models are my parents. My mother in her professional and her private life has always been and continues to be wise, far wiser than I could hope to be, fair, considerate of other people's needs, and yet manages to get things done. So for me, that's a terrific role model. You say to people before you jump into a decision, what would your mother or grandmother think about that? We say it to our own kids before they post something on the internet. For me, that's a guidance for life. What would my mother or my father have done in that situation? And would I be happy if my own daughters, who are young adults, if they emulated the sorts of behaviour that I'm hoping to model? And I think that's a really high measure of your own standards. And I mean, you get your ethics from your family, you get your values from your family, from other places as well, depending on the other influences on you. But that's a really strong starting point, isn't it?
I guess it's interesting because I think if you are ethical, you almost, it's like your friends and your family, when you're raising your children, you almost automatically associate with families that almost have the same values as you. It's an interesting one. I guess it's an interesting thing for you too in seeking out. Is that a measure when you say you're looking at other people and what they do and your associations, both on a personal and professional level? I guess that ethical radar is something that we really look for in the people that we know and see in terms of their fairness, how they treat others. I guess my question to you is, what leaders do you admire and why? When you look around you now at the moment, we're dealing with, the political side of things at home and abroad that's, a little bit beige. It hasn't been exactly wonderful in terms of a great display of ethics. We look at some of the companies that have had to pay millions in terms of, damages to people, perhaps for work that they've should or shouldn't have done. I'm interested in what leaders do you admire and why? Why do you admire them?
Well, the really obvious one for me in the political sphere is Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. She's not perfect, and she would be the first one to say that she's not perfect. But I think the approach that she takes to wellbeing, including having a wellbeing budget for New Zealand, points out clearly that wellbeing is far more important than continued economic growth, and that wellbeing in itself does actually contribute to economic growth. If your community isn't healthy and doesn't have strong wellbeing, then everything else is going to start to crumble around the fringes, and we can see that in countries overseas. So I think that she is a very clear one. A lot of leaders closer to home, people that I've worked with, and I'm not going to name them here because it would be like thanking all your aunts and uncles at a wedding and missing one. So I'm not going to take that risk, but I have worked with some fabulous, terrific leaders throughout my career. I've worked with ones.
Oh, of course. When you look at somebody who's made a decision in a tough time, and I think that's really the sort of the strength of a leader. You've got a pressure point. It could be controversial. There could be a lot of public scrutiny. What do you look for in that leader when they're making that decision at that point in time? Because I think that's where the pressure really is exerted for people, perhaps to sway a little when it comes to their ethical approach.
Yes, and it's where I think any of us are at risk of falling down. But if they are conducting their life with a strong ethical framework, what some would call a values-based framework, then it's almost habitual, isn't it? And when they come to making those decisions, they will apply that framework to it. I think also, when it comes to the really pointy end, good leaders take advice from those around them. They don't make decisions on their own. Well, they do make the decision because in the end it's their decision and they have to bear the consequences of it. But they do that in consultation with people whose advice they value, including people who have views different to their own, because it's so important to be able to seek the counterpoints. If we go down this path, what are the risks? What are the unintended consequences that we could lead to? So there's got to be a lot of logic and a good framework behind it.
I suppose we talk about, you recruit a lot of teams. You've had, ginormous teams throughout the state, and then equally you've had smaller teams. Is there something for you in particular when you're interviewing somebody or reviewing an application? And I know this is a sort of an outside the box sort of question, but this is about careers. And, some people hold their values very true to themselves. We talk about, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about if you're going to apply for a role, work for a company that culturally aligns with you, work for values-based leadership. If you hold something dear, make sure you seek that out in your applications and in the jobs that you pursue and the careers that you develop. What do you look for when you're looking at an application? What do you see and seek when you're interviewing somebody when it comes to the whole ethical piece?
Well, I think that alignment is so important. So I want to understand why their whole life approach, how it can align with the organisation that they're looking to work in. I want them to be hungry, Roisin. I want people who are really willing to learn, no matter what. I hope that I learn something new every single day, and it would be a bit disappointing to have a day where you get to the other end and you think, oh, I don't think I actually broadened my knowledge or skills at all today. So I want people that are always hungry to learn, but that are happy to do that in a cooperative, collaborative environment. I don't want solo players anywhere. I don't think that they're very useful.
I suppose people working, so this is the other side of that question, really. In this current market, times are tough and people may be forced to take positions that perhaps aren't exactly their ideal role, or it could be a stepping stone to something. There are so many different ways of looking at, why do I take this job? How does it benefit me? How does it benefit my learning? How does it benefit my progression? But I guess the question is that if you find yourself in a workplace that is not in keeping with your values, I guess what advice would you give to young people when they're facing perhaps some of those ethical conundrums? What would you say to them?
Yeah. And it's so true, isn't it? You can't always choose. You can't always have your dream job. And you will, during your career, find yourself in jobs that really have the potential to make you miserable, but you can't not be there because you kind of need to feed yourself and your family.
Yeah, absolutely.
In those circumstances, I think that you need to take the pulse of the people to whom you're reporting, to take the pulse of the organisation, and wherever possible, give frank and fearless advice where you think that it's appropriate. If you see something that you think is damaging people, damaging the country, the company, that's not useful, then hopefully you can call it out. Obviously, in some companies, that's not going to be an opportunity, and with some leaders, that's not a possibility either. I think in those cases, you learn everything you can from the company while you're there, from the role, and you're also at the same time looking around to find something that aligns with you better. But don't get bogged down to the point where you're so miserable in a job that you can't see that it's going to offer you anything. If you're stuck there, learn while you're there.
I think there's always that thing when you're coming up through the ranks and you sort of feel like, and this is looking at managers and leaders, there are things that you see that are happening that you don't particularly approve of. And I think there is that fear. I think with ethics comes a level of fear that people are actually concerned, if I open my mouth, that's me, I'm finished. And I'm just wondering how people can broach those conversations without putting it all on the line. You're saying, obviously, in your heart, it doesn't take much to figure out if you're coming to work of a day and you don't want to go there and you feel compromised in that work. Not everybody has the opportunity to walk away, but that would be the plan. But if you felt that you should say something, if you felt, how many young people do you and I know, and people coming through the ranks, and they're at work and they have this sense of, gosh, I really don't agree with this. This is not good. And but it's that thing that, it's a top-down culture. And if you say something, you're suddenly being obstructive, or you're being awkward, or you're being too fixed, or, all those certain attributes. There's a certain style of leadership. When people start to sort of front up and say, I'm not comfortable with this, there's a certain style of leadership that will push you down pretty quickly and push you to the side even more quickly. My question to you is, how would you broach? I mean, your first, if it's a good company generally, you could just find yourself in a bad function. How would you broach, if you were giving advice to young people out there that find themselves in that situation, what sort of strategies do you think would be useful for them to use before they decide, I need to move because this isn't good for me?
That's interesting. If I don't move, the lights go off, just as you say, I need to move. Um, there's
We
hard
can still
setting
see
and
you
hard
though,
opening.
perfectly fine.
Look, I think this is where having a good mentor is so important. Whether your mentor is within your organisation or outside it, you need someone where you can have a conversation that's removed from the actual, what's actually happening in the workplace to say, look, this is my view. This is what I'm seeing. It seems to me like there's a real problem here. What do you think? And unpack that with a mentor who you trust and who's hopefully values align, ethics align with your own, and get somebody else to help work it out. And particularly for young people, when you come into those toxic workplaces and you have no choice but to be there, there's no way you can work that all out by yourself. So call for help. It might be parents, it might be family members, it might be people in other professions. If you can get a good mentoring relationship going early in your career, it will be invaluable to you right throughout.
Mm. I think the other thing is too, Carolyn, when you're having that conversation, it's easy to be emotional when it comes to our values and when it comes to our ethics. But I think, you have to have the facts and the data at your disposal. Whatever you're saying, I think has to be objective. I mean,
Mm,
we're not going to go into specific situations today because that's not what this is about. It's about guidance and counsel. I think we see enough of that played out in the papers and on the news. But I guess if you were talking to somebody about how they might stack up that argument, so the first thing is talking to a mentor. The mentor will hopefully, as you say, be aligned with you. But what tools and strategies have you found useful when you're trying to say, look, I think if you go down this path, this is where we might end up. Whereas these are the facts. What sort of strategies and tools have you used, perhaps, to broach some of those conversations?
mm, mm. I think that the first question, and it's a question to, or something to consider for yourself before you even start conversations, is don't take it personally. I think often things happen to us in the workplace and we take it personally. And if we continue to take it personally and don't realize that it's got nothing to do with us, it's to do with other people, then that can drive us down and grind us to a powder very quickly. So I'd say don't take it personally, but then you really need to look at the pros and cons of any situation. I mean, if there's something happening and you're concerned about it, do you think it's illegal? Do you think it's unethical? Well, in that case, maybe it's time to think about being some sort of whistleblower. But that takes a lot of consideration because that can be career destroying.
And has a lot of repercussions, as we've seen with those
Absolutely,
that were whistleblowers. I mean,
absolutely.
that is such a vulnerable place to put yourself
Mhm.
in.
It really
And
is. You have to see that as your last resort, or whatever is happening is so egregious that it just has to stop. And sometimes you do see people that literally have to, well, physically, figuratively, have to throw themselves under the bus to stop something awful happening. That does occur. But
mm,
failing that, I mean, there's all sorts of tools out there, and I'd go back to something like the Potter box that helps you work out in various quadrants where you think things are sitting and what the issues might be. It might just be writing yourself a list of pros and cons on a piece of paper, consulting with other people who might have been in similar situations before, reading up. Yeah, but there's no simple one answer, definitely.
I think also, we talked about a while ago, you talked about a toxic culture. And I sometimes think the ethics of leadership determines the culture of an organization.
Totally,
And
totally.
I'd just be interested in your comments on that because, again, many people are lured into this blue chip, sophisticated HR, tons of progress, great remuneration, you know, and some companies are like that, but the function you're in could be a dodgy one. You could
Mm,
just have you could just have that leader or that manager who's not all that they're cut out to be. But I'd just be very interested in your thoughts about, again, people looking for work, looking to progress in work, people being stuck in roles where perhaps they're not altogether too happy, as you described earlier. What do you think are the links to ethics and culture? And how is that apparent to you when you see that it's probably not all that it could be or should be?
mm. No, certainly in an organisation, it starts at the top and it flows through. In a good organisation, there's opportunities for it to flow through from all levels, but in toxic organisations, it's generally top-down giving permission to others throughout the organisation to behave equally as badly. So the sorts of things that flow through, I mean, often it goes back into the history of the organisation, and it's become so much part of the culture that it's never going to change, and you're not going to change it. I guess it comes back to why you're in the organisation, and if you're hunting those really lucrative jobs, which can be pretty enticing, particularly when you're young, then yeah, you might end up in a job that just doesn't align for you, that over time even corrupts your own ethics and values. You have to make that decision. Is that where you want to be? Some people
Or
do.
could go the other way.
Yeah.
Or in fact could go
Yeah.
the other way, and you mature to a point that you said this simply isn't acceptable.
Yep, I've outgrown it.
You studied a Master of Journalism and your specialization was ethics. And I know you've held that true in your career all the way, or strove. You've really done everything possible to try to hold that close to you. I guess the question is, what were the three things you've learned about ethics from those studies and the three things you take with you today? And I'm thinking in particular if people are studying, what sort of courses they would study, what sort of that would align with their values, not just the work that they do, but the lines of study that they pursue as well. You obviously pursue that for a reason that was valuable for you. What were the three things you took out of those studies?
Look, let me tell you why I did a master's in journalism ethics. It was because I was working in an organisation where I saw examples, not right across the organisation, but I saw specific examples where ethics it was a black hole. It was, anti-ethical, if that can be such a thing. And I was at a level where I put up with it, went along with it to some extent for a time. And then I got to the point where I just said, I can't do this, but I need to restore my faith in journalism pretty much. And that's why I went off and did that master's, and it took me off on different paths that I hadn't even imagined at the time. The three things that you do, wow. I mean, whatever you pursue, for me, pursue something that you love, because we spend so much of our lives at work and it influences every waking minute of our day and often the sleeping ones. Pursue what you love.
I guess the other question is, if you could give advice to leaders today, we live in a very uncertain and unpredictable world right now. There's a lot of talk about, government departments and perhaps some of that top-down management and how people are feeling. We've seen widespread cuts in the university where you used to work, in the commercial sector. There's a lot of people that are struggling today. And I guess, we talk about leaders needing to be commercial, but they need to also demonstrate, as somebody said to me, the avocado core. They need to be soft internally. They need to be able to show that they care about people. You can be soft on the outside and you can be tough on the inside. My question to you is, if you were advising leaders today on how to be ethical, how to think about the world we live in today, what would be your key message to them?
What are you going to leave as a legacy for the people that are coming along behind in 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, 100 years? What are we going to leave behind for them? And that's in terms of community, in terms of culture, in terms of environment altogether. So yeah, what are you doing to help your kids or their kids or their kids? And what sort of world do you want them to live in? And model that. Model it now. And listen to people. Find out what they want and expect too, because it's not personal. It's not all about you.
That's absolutely right. And then there's, I guess the final question is really young people, people who are in the midst of their careers, people who are approaching retirement. Many, many people, COVID-19 has been unsympathetic to all and sundry. And we're approaching Christmas now, and then we're going to come into the new year. And I always call that the dust off the CV time. I guess my question to you is, from an ethical perspective, from a career perspective, from a job hunting perspective, is there one message that you would give these people that they could make their own, that might help them in terms of their, I guess, strength and resilience and methods and means over the coming weeks and months?
It's It's a tough one, isn't it? Because there's no one message for all people. I mean, for most people in Australia, I would say most of us are incredibly and ridiculously lucky, even now, even if we've lost our jobs and we have something to fall back on. Roisin, you and I have spoken about the plight of refugees in Australia who have nothing to fall back on.
Absolutely.
So, you know,
Yeah.
we are, most of us are incredibly fortunate. So don't forget that. Don't subside into misery if you can possibly avoid it. Sometimes you have to let yourself plunge down into a bit of misery, but make sure you can see the light and come on out again. What is it that you can do that can contribute to society through your job and through other measures as well? You know, and if people are out of work at the moment, my God, there are so many volunteer opportunities out there at the moment to help others, and at the same time develop your own skills and develop yourself as a person.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, there are so many TAFE courses available now. They're a smidgen of their usual cost. There are so many, I think, apprentices, traineeships. If you want to go to university, God knows, our tutors need to be working. And Carolyn, you know what the university sector is like right now, across the world and here in Australia. It's going to take a while before normality comes back and our international students come back and we're back to some semblance of normality.
If ever. I don't know that we'll ever return to what we were. But I think that the pandemic certainly exposed a lot of weaknesses that were already there in workplaces and in society. And those of us that are fortunate enough to be able to sort of try to contribute towards some repair work there need to do that. Gosh, I sound
And I think that's on that. Well, not really. I think we're at that point where, the world is considerably changed. Our own communities are considerably changed. The corporate and government sector, as we know it, is considerably changed. And I think, today, I thought today's session with you was very timely because this is a period for leaders to take stock and to understand, what fair, equitable, consistent leadership looks like. And to think about that as we approach 2021 and the challenges that we're facing 2021, to actually start thinking about who they are, what they are, and the value that they can bring, not just to the companies they work for, but the people that work for them, the broader stakeholders and community. Carolyn Varley, I just want to tell you, you are a wise lady, and it's an absolute pleasure to spend time with you today. So thank you very much. I think there is much for people to take on board and learn from today's conversation. And you and I will be revisiting other things in the future, but I'm very, very happy to have you on board. To everybody else who's been listening to our show today, tune in, take some note, hope some of this will help you. The Living Your Career show airs every Tuesday and Thursday at 12 o'clock. We have some fabulous guests for you to listen to. Carolyn, thank you. I really appreciate your time today, and we'll be talking soon.